Now, call my mind blown, but Sony has dropped a 50 to 150 f2 G-Master zoom lens. That's a big deal. There is so much to unpack. If you are looking for a video review of the 50 to 150, this is not it. There's plenty of people talking about it right now. I'm not partnered with Sony and I haven't got their attention enough to get my hands on a lens to review. But as an existing 70 to 200 GM Mark II user and having a raft of Sony cameras and GM lenses that I professionally shoot with, I want to spark a conversation with you all and share top of the dome thoughts of what I think about the 50 to 150, how it kind of fares with the 70 to 200 that I know is kind of getting thrown into the mix, but also how Sony is evolving their previous holy grail trinity of zoom lenses, building on the 2870 f2. Now, I could have made this video earlier, but I think the 50 to 150 sparked a very interesting conversation in that. So we are here. If you are joining me, then I absolutely invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, whether you're someone who shoots portraits, weddings, auto sports, events, like all of those stuff. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it, and you might have some additional depth and perspective of what it's like if you are an existing 70 to 200 user. And yeah, who doesn't love talking about camera gear? I do. Hey friend, of course we have to talk about the wider aperture, the f2. Previously with Sony's trinity of lenses, the 1635, the 2470 and the 7200, those ones maxed out at an f2.8, and that was still very fast for a wide range of work whilst covering a more convenient focal range over prime lenses. But this new f2 is seriously setting a new benchmark of what we can expect with zoom lenses. That f2 is definitely going to spark a lot of considerations for both zoom users and even prime users like me. The next one, of course, is that interesting 50 to 150 focal length. So in some ways, Sony are treating this as like the one lens of all. And while that's really dependent on your workflow, what you like to shoot and focal length, there is definitely some arguments there because it's kind of touching within the 2470 and the 7200. You get the 50 end of that zoom range, and then within the 7200 you get it up to the 150. So if you cut off the extreme ends of those lenses, essentially you can cover most of that focal length with this one lens. So that can be very exciting. Let's just say for discussion's sake that it's a GM constant with the rest of their lines. So with my 7200, which has very fast autofocus and super sharp optics, let's just assume the parity there. Hardware wise, it's got a 95mm filter diameter, so you might want to consider that for existing filters and matte boxes. Probably no problem for matte boxes, but definitely with filters. Weight wise is also slightly heavier than the 7200 Mark II, which tops out about 1.15 kilograms. The 50 to 150 is 1.35, give or take. So I'm familiar shooting with this. The extra 200 grams is not really going to be that much, but if you don't shoot with longer telephoto zoom lenses, then yeah, that's gonna be one of the more weightier lenses within Sony's range. You'll still get all of the hardware stuff like the iris lock, the clickable aperture, and the zoom range. And what I like about the 7200, you also get in the 50 to 150, is the internal zoom. So going from 7200, it doesn't extend the lens. You don't have to make any adjustments if you are putting on a gimbal or worrying about the weight shift balance with your camera. The 50 to 150 also does not have optical steady shot, so no lens stabilization. It does rely on your camera IBIS, and Sony's been doing that with most of their prime lenses and zoom lenses, but going to the telephoto ones, the 7200 does have optical steady shot, so something to consider when you're handling it. And the biggest one that we have to talk about is the price. So the 50 to 150 f2 costs $3,899 US. For reference, the 7200 Mark II costs 2,000, I believe 2,799, and that's definitely going to frame how many of us are going to view the 50 to 150, because maybe no matter how good the 50 to 150 f2 performs, how well it can fit in our workflow, even if you're doing this professionally and you can just add all these lenses to your kit and essentially find the right tool for the job, that price point is still going to make people think twice. Sony still has a raft of amazing G-Master lenses, and even though this is the newest one, the fresh one, the most evolved, like, there are definitely other ways that you can make use of that money. Taking a step back, it's absolutely awesome that Sony has released a new zoom range with f2. Of course, the same is for the 2870, but I feel the 50 to 150, which doesn't have a direct overlap with existing lenses, since Sony's 2470 f2.8 is kind of broadly covered within the 2870 f2, but this 50 to 150 and how it overlaps two different lenses, I think kind of really freshens up and gives a very interesting perspective into whether this lens is going to fit for you or even for me. So whether you are a prime user, whether you prefer Sony's previous focal length or these new ranges where Sony's able to cram in that f2 aperture within these interesting in-between zoom ranges, yeah, I'm all for it. Of course, it's going to heavily depend on budget, what you're willing to spend, and if you already have an existing line of lenses, like you might have a raft, I have a few that I rely on here, or you're literally new to Sony's ecosystem, like, that is definitely going to frame whether the 50 to 150 suits you. And of course, the nature of your work, if you're a hobbyist, if you are shooting professionally, all of those are going to come into play. But hardware wise, I think it's a good job from Sony. When you are a prime user like me, I'm probably a cross of the two, since I rely on the zoom lens for the higher end. That works for me, and I have my 35 1.4. You're not really sacrificing that much light or the aperture gap compared to the access of zoom you get in those. Of course, price is going to factor in weight and all that usability, so it's definitely on your shooting side. But this 50 to 150 is definitely going to cause some interesting and healthy dilemmas, and I'm curious to see how that kind of unfolds. The old Trinity evolving into the new f2 era, I think super exciting. Kudos to Sony. There's a lot of chatter of whether the 50 to 150 can absolutely be that one lens for all, and there are definitely some strong advocates and arguments for it. I think definitely towards the longer end, if you were previously shooting with a 2470 and then maybe a 7200, having probably 75-80% of your focal length and taking advantage of crop modes on an A1, A9, A7 series, you can definitely hit the longer end of a 7200. So a 50 to 150 in crop would hit around 75 to 225. And if you don't mind sort of like pixel binning or cropping in on your sensor in less megapixels, probably not much of an issue if you're shooting with the A1 or the A7R series. You're still going to get great and healthy amount of pixels in there and the detail. Then you might actually find that trade-off just worthwhile. If you are a hobbyist and you generally don't pick up a lot of lenses and you do want as much versatility within one lens you are carrying, then absolutely the 50 to 150 can has its place. But of course, there's the price tag that we are talking about. The short end also covers that nifty 50. So if you are a 50mm type of shooter, then yeah, you've got access and you still get that f2, and I think that will be plenty enough. You might just want to pair that with a lighter and a wider lens. Maybe it's the 20mm, maybe it's the new 15mm, maybe it's a 35. The primes and how much lighter, more nimble, compact they are, and being relatively inexpensive, that might be a nice combination to work with. Now, the next topical point, quite strong opinions about, is whether the 50 to 150 can replace a 70 to 200. And Again, there's strong arguments for it. In crop mode, you can hit the 7200 focal length on the long end, stretching to 225, and having that faster f2 is going to be amazing. There's no doubt about that. So you can achieve it with that lens. If you are an existing 7200 user, like for me, I don't have any like strong desire that I would want to swap out my 7200 because I absolutely love it. Like especially the Mark II is insanely quick. It's still 200 grams lighter than the 50 to 150, and you are still losing native 50 millimeter off the long end. And I've also found the f2.8 just plenty enough. If you're shooting out, you're traveling, if you're doing anything that's not necessarily low light or indoors with little light to work with, like honestly, f2.8 has been an awesome pleasure. Great depth of field, nice blurring, and it's just super tack sharp from the widest 70 up to the long end 200. Like it's just sharp throughout. Let's not forget here that the Mark II, alongside some of Sony's new refreshed Mark II generation in the Gmaster series, are like incredibly awesome. Like they are great optics, very fast autofocus. You're still going to get that in the 50 to 150. So performance wise, you're just not really going to see much gain there. It's really for the extra stop in light. I could replace it, but at the same time, like, why would I? To be honest, it's kind of a trade-off between, do you want more of an f2 and extra stop in light, or do you want the 50 millimeter end? And that argument that I tend to see with the 50 to 150, you can crop in, you can get up to 225 millimeter. I could crop in on my 7200 and get 300 millimeter. Even this being a short telephoto lens, cropping in that, I'm doing it because I want more reach. And I still feel at times like 7200, which I thoroughly enjoy, I'm still cropping in because I do want that extra reach. And for how much lighter this weighs over the 50 to 150, I would literally take that focal length over the f2. I just find it's not really enough for me to want to switch. But if you are starting with a clean slate and you don't have a 70 to 200, you don't necessarily want to buy a telephoto lens because you just don't shoot it that often, but you do want some instances of getting closer, then the 50 to 150 can definitely make a lot of sense. It just really goes back down to that price point, because I have to remind, it is 3,800 US dollars, and I think it's like 4,400 euros, give or take. So the price is definitely different among your regions, and that's going to sway whether it's worth it or not, because it could be more expensive where you are. And that's 1,000 more than the Mark II, which is an incredible lens. So yeah, it's just very hard to justify even the global economic situation. I think the innovation on the f2, I'm not going to argue its price point. If you want the best in class with a zoom and an f2, you're gonna have to pay for it. But it's expensive, right? It is expensive. And going alongside this, you can still pick up a prime Gmaster lens in the lower end. Like you can pick up the 35 1.4, you could pick up the 50 1.4. Like they're gonna slightly cost a bit more than the 51 to 150, but you get what I'm saying. You can still invest in two Gmaster lenses over the 50 to 150 f2. But that does circle back to what Sony is saying, in that this one lens can cover you for two lenses. You're just going to pay a premium over it. So there is obviously arguments and logic to both routes. You just have to decide what is ultimately right for you and your budget. All right, a little break. It's spotlight time, and I want to highlight two of my friends in today's video. They are Polar Pro and Field Made Co. Now, if you are looking to adapt maybe the 50 to 150 f2 or your existing lens, I've been enjoying the Polar Pro Helix Maglock filters. These are magnets. They're super easy and quick to install. You can hot swap these among your existing lenses, or if you're looking to just have a very quick flow running and gunning, and you just want to have your filter options and not worry about threading all the time, these ones are absolutely awesome. I enjoy using these across my entire lens, from my 35, my 20, my 7200, it fits all of those, and even my Cine lens with its 86. I've got the short stash every day and the mist PL, which combines a polarizer and a mist effect. But I've also been enjoying their new Chroma Glass series. This is the Peter McKinnon. They got 2 VND strengths, and it has a separate control for VND and a polarizer, so you can now independently cut and reduce glare and reflections from the VND control if you are shooting video. You might have noticed as well in my lenses, I have these awesome indicator labels, and these provide a visually pleasing and aesthetic reference of, yeah, what cap goes to which. I've got a my 7200, also my 35 looks pretty dope, but I also really enjoy the sensor body caps. I've got it for my A7 III, and this is using a PolarPro's body cap, which has additional storage for an SD, CF Express or AirTag, add some extra security in a nice polished aluminium body, and also my FX30. They cover a variety of brands outside of Sony, Canon, even some Cine lenses and third-party ones. So if you want to add a bit of organization, nice visual reference, Fieldmaker and Polar Pro down in the comments. I actually think I would miss my 35 if I went for the 50-150, because yeah, I absolutely love shooting at 35. I like a 35 for it's kind of an environmental portraiture. I like the way I can compose with that, and it's not too close. That being said, if you are a 50mm, an f2 can definitely work for you. I think f2 is just a great aperture, and at least a compromise more so than when you previously had access to an f2.8 on the 2470. I think that was a bit too much of a compromise to give up over the 50-1.2, 50-1.4 lenses. 50-150 f2, I think there's a lot more going for that kind of setup now that I might overlook or skip a 50 prime lens in favor for choosing other focal lengths, because I can kind of hit it with the 50-150. If you are downsizing, if you consider both of these is the cost of a 50-150 lens, yeah, there's some argument there. But what I like about going this route is on a prime, they're generally so much smaller, compact. The 35 hits a nice sweet spot for me. I like cameras that feel substantial and some weightness for stabilization. So I would actually like shooting this over carrying something very heavy and giving me access to it. That's just my personal flow. But some of you might enjoy just, yeah, having that full range of a 50-150 and the slightly heavier weight over a 7200, because you don't have to switch or swap lenses. The next thing that is quite important to talk about, and maybe isn't often talked about enough with lenses, is the filter thread. And being a 95mm means you have to kind of work your existing setup because it's not within Sony's typical, like a 67, 72, 77. Being 95, just throwing your existing filter setup out of whack. And for me, I use the Polar Pro Maglock filters. I'm going to share that very soon, since I wanted to just get this video out. I've got it mounted onto my Cine lens, which is an 86, and that's pretty flush here. So having a 95, if your existing filters generally doesn't cover it, you're gonna have to buy a new one. This one adapts across all the range, but I've also got their 114mm adapter, so I can mount my matte box Nano, the base camp, on to these base plates. And they also have 95mm threads that will still work with these two. It's a bit of a non-issue with my existing setup, but if you're someone who uses threaded ones, or you only have base plates, that kind of covers your existing one, since 95 is more of your typical Cine lens type, then that is going to be an area you have to consider. So there are some potentially additional expenses when you are looking to buy the 50-150 f2. Something I also didn't realize, I've had this for 2.5 years, and I only realized that you can take it off. I don't know how I missed that, but yeah, at least all of the wear and tears on the lens feet rather than the body. Unlike the 7200, the 50 to 150 does not have teleconverter access and ability. So whereas you can outfit the 7200 with either a 1.4 or 2 times, that will effectively give you up to a 280 or a 400 at the maximum end with the 2x converter. You cannot install that on the 50 to 150. There's no way around it because it's down to, I believe, the flange or the lens mounting. You do get hit on the optics, the sharpness, and also the light reduction. But if Sony had a teleconverter for the 50 to 150, I think that would make it interesting, because then you can double it up to a 300mm and you might get to an f2.8, f4. That would have actually been pretty cool. So it's a shame that wasn't there, because it might change the context a little bit more for long end shooters. It's interesting position. It's not necessarily awkward, it's just different. You can downsize, but at the same time, you might feel like it's just not wide enough and not long enough. Like, it kind of occupies that in between, and sometimes that looks like a good spot for wedding and portraitures, anything that's run and gun or very dynamic. F2 is going to give you nice lower light capability going from outside to inside. So if you are shooting for weddings, I can feel that transition into nighttime can be great, and you might not necessarily have control over external lighting equipment and may just have to use the artificial lights indoors. I think there's a good argument there. It's really going to be anything low light and where you can't change your lenses as fast. If you had to rely on one lens and you're only bringing one camera body, then I think that the f2 can work. Flexing that f2 is going to be invaluable, especially if you're doing this professionally. When I was shooting for F1 Paddock Club at a few races before in Monza, in the Castellet, France, and Zandvoort in Netherlands, I honestly just rocked 2 bodies at the same time. I had one camera strap and I would have my 35, this one here, and my 7200. And to be honest, that gave me great coverage. The 50 to 150 could replace these two and just go for the one. But to be honest, the 35, when I'm needing a bit more environment shots, that bit more headway to fit in some of that crew and, you know, drivers jumping in there, you can add it to your workflow, but again, it's going to cost even more than how I found a 7200 and a 35 work. I use the Peak Design slide lights, even the leash can work. And I had 2 camera bodies, both my A7 III and my A7 IV mounted with these 2, and that just worked well. I honestly just find that working and minimizing the downtime of swapping lenses, because both cameras are kind of set up and ready to go. And of course, that f2, never going to deny, for photo and for video is definitely going to help with keeping noise low, especially indoors. So if you can't lens swap, if you find operating within 50 to 150 focal range works well for what you shoot, and you don't want to carry 2 bodies around or 2 different lenses, then you can go for the 50 to 150. Because I've got my 7200, it's very hard to convince myself. So I think the Sony 50 to 150 f2 definitely has a lot of long-term and retain value that I've seen in my 7200. If you can fork over and invest, and you maybe can only pick one lens and you want the best possible quality, and you're willing to spend for just having that one lens do most of your work, or maybe even all of your work, the 50 to 150 f2 is a definite great choice to pick up, as long as you find it makes financial sense in where you are. Just don't get caught up in thinking it's the latest, it's the one that you need the most, when actually an f2.8, Sony's other GM lenses, or even primes that have brighter up to 1.4, 1.2, can do the job for less. But yeah, that's me. Sony's new lens, pretty dope. Catch you in the next one. But until then, keep being awesome. Peace.